Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Wheel of Mind, a character point of view reread podcast dedicated to Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. This season, we're taking a deep dive into Moiraine's point of view. I'm Lajara Dane of the White Oddjaw.
Hi, and I'm Giskell, a scholar from Ilion. Now, I want to give you a spoiler warning. We will do, and probably always shall, give spoilers to anything and everything in this series, and possibly side notes on other series as well. Anything nerdy, we're into it, and we love to share it in this. So, if you have not read the entire series, we recommend you do that before listening to this podcast. Now, today we're here to discuss chapters 23 and 24 of New Spring. Lajara, if you would, let's get started with it.
Yes, I have a very brief synopsis of chapter 22. Moiraine wanders through a few other neighborhoods and ponders Queen Atheniel's futile yet generous attempts to solve poverty in Candor. She counts it among the reasons she wants to be as far away from the Sun Throne as she can get. She wanders into countless other diverse but still shabby establishments, being offered suspicious wine 3 more times, but she simply declined instead of making any more one-power-induced intimidation overtures that could expose her as a blue sister to any potential blue-black sisters in the city. She did have to use the fear-inducing weave a couple of more times out in the street, as well as a few other weaves, physically hitting people with flows of air and things like that to protect herself and Arrow, because people will just try to pull the horse's reins away and pull her off of the horse. Reflecting on the fact that if she even brought them to a magistrate, she'd likely be victim blamed for being richly dressed and with a nice horse and in such rough parts of town. As the sun is dipping towards the horizon and Moiraine is nearing giving up, Siwan finds her, drags her back to where she's staying at the Evening Star. It's actually quite nice and more expensive than Moiraine had expected. It seems to cater to middle class merchants who are common in Candor because it's kind of a crossroads between a lot of different nations. Siwan recounts how she has tracked down a potential mother of the dragon, a Lady Inez, but the woman is in the Isashar Palace and so is unreachable. As for the Black Aja, Siwan heard a story of a blacksmith who also happened to be a community organizer of sorts who was potentially assassinated with the power. He had not a mark on him except for his broken back. Moiraine is skeptical that the Black Aja would assassinate a blacksmith, but agrees that they need to be careful. She then hatches a plan to gain access to the mother who had borne a son while seeing the dawn break over Dragonmount, and thus ends Chapter 23, The Evening Star.
Right. So this one, yeah, we see them moving closer to their goal. Their goal, of course, being, finding the dragon reborn. And this is the first name they've come across where the person actually was close to Dragon Mount. So this one, it's the dawn breaking over Dragon Mount. Doesn't mean she was there, but at least they're closer.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, I mean, the path to get there. We occasionally see, I would say, some rougher parts of town in some of these series, but this one to me really takes the cake. I can't recall in the rest of the series where there was a part of town that was this seedy, or maybe just you know someone like Moiraine, who's obviously a person of wealth and power, at least in their standards, even though she is not dressed very richly at this point. It's enough that it catches the attention of people in this very poor part of town. And I mean, it's not just once or twice that you'd expect, but repeatedly, over and over. Horse theft, the attempted, people in the end attempting to put the Bill Cosby on her with
with the
with
drugging and
yeah
everything.
with the drugs or drinks,
Mm-hmm.
and it just is happening over and over. It really kind of gives you a feel that this is not just sort of a kind of rough part of town. This is a very bad place. And it's amazing she keeps her cool through most of this.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm impressed that she continued thinking, "Oh yeah, I'm sure Siwan is hanging out in a place like this."
yes, 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 I know. I mean, especially, and it is kind of surprising that Siwan would not pick the very cheapest place to stay. Um, but I guess she was kind of thinking, well, Moraine won't go to that part of the town. She'll be a place a little nicer. Um,
Yeah, they both.
but
Yeah, Siwan doesn't actually say why she picked the Evening Star because we would expect that she would go somewhere cheaper, like you said. But
right,
she maybe they were both trying to anticipate each other and missed each other for that reason. I didn't think
right,
about it like that because
right,
Siwan never does tell us. They kind of evade that
right.
because they have so much else to talk about.
Right. Yeah, she just comes back with, "Oh, I knew you'd be looking for me in this part of town." Just like I knew that's what you'd expect, so I'm down here looking for you. But in my mind, I think Siwan is very tight with money because she grew up with nothing,
Hmm.
grew up in poverty. She just cannot get used to the idea of being able to spend money easily, much less recklessly. Uh, but but here it's kind of like maybe she had sense enough to avoid the more dangerous parts of town, regardless of the cost.
Yeah. I think
Find
that
find
that's
something.
not really a luxury to have to pay for. I think it's just basic necessities of safety. And so
Right.
that's still her being frugal in her mind. Whereas Moiraine doesn't have that same danger radar that Siwan would have because she grew up. Maybe I wouldn't say that, the Kyrian court with the game of houses is particularly safe, but it's safe from
Right.
a lot of these very physical threats. And so
Exactly.
she doesn't have a gauge for how dangerous is too dangerous. Any poor part of town might seem seedy to her, and she wouldn't have that same, I guess, nuanced understanding of what's squalor that we're willing to put up with, or what is squalor that is like dangerous to my physical person.
Right. And especially a place like Chachin or any place that is in the borderlands near the blight, these are people that they have to be prepared to fight at any time. And so you kind of see them as very hardened people.
Hmm.
Um, and even though it does talk about Queen Atheniel's desire to attack poverty, which is very admirable, but still it's like there's not this base of morality. I guess it's kind of
Hmm.
equated in my mind to some of the old gold rush towns,
Oh, yeah.
out west, where yeah, there was the chance to make it really big, really rich, but there was so many people scrabbling over land, over different things, that life was cheap. And it's kind of what you see here. You see those people who are not, they don't have that moral compass. They don't have any goods. They're willing to do pretty much anything to survive, which includes stealing something from someone, killing someone to take what they have, or basically to human trafficking. Drug
Hmm.
someone and sell them off into prostitution or whatever. Which is the impression you get of what that first innkeeper did with any young lady that would come in
Hmm.
there, the spiced wine, and of course it, in a way, when Moiraine just leaves after the woman drunk the wine and passed out herself, and several men get up and start making their way over there. Moraine and other women just leave the room. I mean, in a way, it's kind of justice because of what this woman's done, but that's still sick. I mean, that's
Yeah.
twisted. I recoiled at that, just to
Yes.
say, oh my goodness, you know, the that kind of, or not, I should say, that level of immorality, with no center, no right and wrong, no compass of good and evil. And there are many people that way in the world. So it's one of these things that's not unreal or unrealistic in any way, but it's gritty enough that yeah, it really it bothered me. It bothered me
Yeah.
to see how that was just accepted as normal.
Absolutely. Several of your points intersect well with some of the notes that I made. So I had more to say about this chapter than I do about some of them.
Yeah.
And particularly because we get to see Moraine's reaction to other people's immorality, and
Yes.
we get to understand her sense of justice. And I think that's really important to understanding part of who a character is how they react in situations like this.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to be a little critical of her here. I've typically been a Moiraine stan this whole time, just like very
Yes.
pro Moiraine, but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything that she does. But before I get into her personal sense of justice, I wanted to touch on something you said about uh, sort of gold rush, like Wild West type towns, because I did get that sense here as well. And it did line up with stuff we know about the Borderlands from the main series, at least somewhat. So, Ingtar Shinawa from Shinar, whom we meet, I guess, at the very end of Eye of the World, but really we get to know him in the Great Hunt. He's the dark friend Shinaran soldier who is trying to redeem himself later while he's traveling with Rand and hunting for the horn and everything. When he's talking about why they need the horn, and then he brings this up again during his confession of being a dark friend to Rand, he talks about how the nations of the world are withering. It's sort of this same dwindling we're seeing in the tower, but we're seeing it with human civilization. Not only has civilization not recovered from the breaking, but it also has continued to dwindle, at least in the last several hundred years since the shadow has really been rising. And you see, even on the maps, this is common criticism we get of people who are not as steeped in the lore of the series, actually. There's YouTube videos out there of people criticizing the world building and saying, these maps don't make sense. You can't even tell where the borders are between some countries, and there's all this apparently uninhabited land just in the middle of the continent. But that was exactly Ingtar's point, that humans are retreating every day and land is being claimed by wilderness, and in many cases claimed by even more of the blight.
Yes. Yes.
So we have, I mean, at the time of New Spring, it's only been, I guess, about 25 years since Malkier was swallowed up, something like that. I think that's about how old Lan is. And then we have just all of the nation states in general have a pretty loose grip on their territory. They control their capital cities, and in some cases, only just that. And they don't have good control over the countryside or anything else. So people's moral systems are going to be potentially a lot more selfish in states like that because there's not as strongly centralized governments to enforce a system. And if you live in an area of such scarcity and constant fear, like the borderlands near the blight, I can kind of see how those two factors would interact, where you would have this lawlessness. But at the same time, we actually have Shinaran culture right next to the blight and the Aiel waste, and they don't seem to have this problem in Faldara anyway. So there does seem to be some kind of cultural difference here. But this town almost gives me the vibe of those cities that are controlled by Forsaken, or some of the villages that have been corrupted by Fane coming through, or something later in the
Right.
series. It's just so much more disgusting than a typical city. And
Right.
it makes me wonder if the Black Aja have made it worse by being here. I'm not really sure. Once we get to the end next episode, we'll
Oh,
have a few more questions answered about what they've been doing here. But um yeah, it gives me the vibe almost of those cities where people have been under low level compulsion,
yes,
or
yes.
something.
I had not considered that, but tying it in with what Ingtar said, it's not every country that suffers from that, but like you said,
Mhm.
certain areas, part of it is the isolation. If there's not
Mm.
a lot of trade, there's not a lot of commerce with other cities and other towns, people do tend to kind of insulate themselves in their own culture and their own ways and ignore, the others around them. And even though they may have a strong sense of community in certain places, and i.e. the two rivers, a
Mhm.
strong sense of community, there's also almost a strong sense of xenophobia too.
Mm, yeah.
They did not trust any outsiders, anyone else. They had no reason to. They were very distrustful of Aes Sedai, that they were referred to as witches. And again, you see that's an area where you used to, Manetheren was a huge, growing, powerful force in the world, and has dwindled away to just isolated communities in that area. And even though this is, Chachin is a big city, so you have parts of it that are kind of insulated and pushed off and ignored, and there's rampant poverty, and there's no reason for anyone to try to have a sense of community, a sense of caring for one another. You must be in some of these areas. You must be completely self-focused, self-centered, and have no sense of right and wrong, just a sense of survival. And I
Mhm.
think you're right that it's a very strong influence of evil. I had never, uh, I guess, coupled that in my mind with the workings of the Black Aja causing it to be so bad. I was just kind of astounded, especially on the reread here, about just how terrible the city was, or at
Yeah.
least parts of the city.
I mean, it also makes me wonder if this is one of the nations that's just on the verge of being swallowed by the blight. Maybe not necessarily Black Aja even, but just some corruption from the inside out, that which was Malkir's downfall, because they had one of the rulers, or one of the royal family, I think, was a dark friend, and
Yeah,
that was what eventually kind of was the last straw there. And so I wonder if Candor is similarly on the verge,
yeah,
and maybe that's
yeah.
what we're seeing. But
So we see not only the physical manifestations of the blight, but also the corruption upon people's minds
yeah,
and just their
yeah.
thinking. Right.
And that sense of being in survival mode is sort of how I see Moiraine get into that mindset while she's here as well. So part of these conditions may help explain her behavior, but I still am going to be kind of critical here of her view of justice, with the way that she got back at the innkeeper who tried to drug her. So her sense of justice in this case seems retribution based. And to me, that comes off a little bit narrow and immature. So when she subjects that other woman to the drugging and implied rape that was intended for her, I see her as kind of sinking to that woman's level by being complicit in it, because she did
Yeah.
make her actually drink the drug. So there's a few different kind of ethical systems, if we're going to talk moral philosophy very briefly. So this is, I guess, a big wheel of mind moment, very on brand.
Right.
um, so when we're deciding about an ethical system, there's a few different views, and this is by no means representative, but these are some kind of famous ones. The Kantian view, Immanuel Kant's view on ethics was it was very rule based. You need to stick to some rules and principles and always stick to them no matter what. So he used the example of lying being always wrong in every situation, no exceptions. Because if you start to make exceptions, then everybody can make their own exceptions, and then suddenly you don't really even have rules anymore.
Right.
But we can think of probably plenty of absurd thought experiments, and maybe even less absurd realistic thought experiments, in which you would need to lie to save somebody else, and that would potentially be the right thing to do. So on the other hand, there's the utilitarian approach, championed by people like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. So according to this view, you measure whether something is right not by these principles and whether you're following them to the letter, but more so what's the impact on people that you're having. And so sort of boosting happiness and reducing harm for everyone else is kind of the goal in a utilitarian viewpoint. According to either of those viewpoints, Moiraine's behavior is still difficult to justify.
Yes.
Because if we're looking at the Kantian view, drugging and violating somebody's consent like this would always be wrong in every situation. Whereas Moiraine is kind of seeing, well, she was going to do that to me, so somebody's criminal behavior makes an exception for this. And then if we look at the utilitarian view, she's still, I guess you could see there's potentially the argument to be made that, okay, I'm kind of shutting down this establishment by taking out the person who was running it. But I don't think that's really going to change much in Candor, because this happens to her 3 more times in that day, and that somebody else, the woman may not even own the inn. She might have just been the front for it. I don't even really know. And so
if you're going to be Batman and correct the wrongs around you, that way you've got to do it everywhere. You can't just do it one time and walk away. Right.
I think she may have seen her role as a, vigilante justice being appropriate before she realized just how widespread this is going to be. So I guess that's fair. She didn't know this was going to happen to her 3 more times in the same day. Well, I had one more view on moral philosophy and how people's sense of morality and justice develops. So Kohlberg studied moral reasoning in children and adults, and his system has been criticized, but it's a kind of a basic one we could look at of 3 stages of moral reasoning that a person goes through as they develop. The first one is pre-conventional, in which your answer to why something is wrong is because it hurts me. Hitting is wrong because it hurts me when you hit me. The conventional route is more an appeal to authority. So things are wrong because other people tell me hitting is wrong. My parents tell me that's wrong. So, and I've noticed there are consequences for that. So it's wrong. And then the post-conventional route is an appeal to weighing the options for yourself and being able to make a case-by-case consideration of the ethics of your actions. Now, this has been criticized some because many adults stay at the conventional stage, and many people would say there's nothing wrong with that because a lot of religious systems give you your sense of morality from an authority figure like that. So post-conventional maybe is not for everyone, but it is something that some people move into. I see Moiraine's behavior here as very almost, that pre-conventional kind of childish view of justice. And that's how I see retribution. I view punishment as needing to be more of something that's going to keep other people in society safe. And maybe even do something to help restore anything that was taken from somebody who's been harmed to the extent that that's possible. But I have to look at the fact that she was in this survival mode. This was a very quick decision, but it's still not one that I agree with. I think we need to be asking ourselves, like, how can a society or a system function if all of its members behaved in the way I'm thinking about behaving right now? For a justice system to function well, we all need to consider why we believe certain actions are wrong and ask ourselves, would this be functional if everybody did this? Could such a society fairly protect its members? And so I don't know. Maybe I'm going too white Aja, and I know Moiraine is not really she's never pretended to be interested in philosophical trains of thought like that. But she does have moments of empathy and concern, considering how nobility should use their privilege and power, as we saw when they left the tower and she was thinking about why has this woman's, liege lord or lady not taken care of her after her husband died in the war. And so her dismissal of the state of this city as being something the queen can't do anything about, and her resorting personally to this retribution-based kind of action seems inconsistent with some of her previous thoughts about how governments should work and how justice should work. But
Yeah.
again, I think in this like very brutal survival type situation, many of us would act differently than we normally would.
Right. Now, that's one thing that came to mind when you were talking about this, because I hadn't, like I said, I kind of recoiled at some of it, but I didn't get as in depth with the ethical aspects of it. But since you brought it up, how many people are always 100% completely dedicated to their ethical or moral views without ever messing up? You know,
That's a good
they're
point. None of us, right?
right. So in a way, this is consistent with human nature, even though it's inconsistent with what we normally see from Moiraine.
hmm
In that, okay, she made a bad decision here, and then that brings me to my second point. Which was the wrong thing she did, or the immoral thing she did? Was it in using the weave to compel the woman to drink the drugged wine, or was it when she turned and walked away when she saw how everyone else reacted?
Mm,
I believe she knew something was up, probably robbery, theft of her possessions. I don't know that it entered into her mind that this woman was selling young women into sex slaves.
hmm
Um, and so she compels her to drink the wine. It's kind of a, yeah, this will teach you this. But then when she sees
Yeah.
everyone's reaction, she just eases out of the room with everyone else. Like she goes into survival mode at that point. Oh, this is a lot worse than I thought. Now, again, I may just be playing Forsaken's advocate here by trying to turn the argument around. And I still say she made the wrong choice. I still say
hmm
she did an immoral thing. She did a wrong act. But everyone occasionally makes a wrong act, an immoral decision, or a split second decision that winds up in retrospect being the wrong thing. That's
hmm
not what I should have done, not how I should have reacted, not what I should have said. And in this case, it was a pretty big one. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I don't believe it was the use of the power and causing the woman to drink the wine. That part was more of a, I think, just an I'll teach you. That's a vigilante move. Let
hmm
me teach you a lesson. But then it's when she walked away, in my mind anyway. I may be wrong. Maybe the entire act
Mm.
from beginning to end was, but in my mind, I guess I still see her as being naive enough to not realize exactly where this was going.
hmm
Perceptive enough to know something was wrong, but not enough to know where it was going.
That's
But
a really great point because as this situation unfolds, she does get more information and more of an understanding of what's going on. So at first, if I'm looking at this from more of a Kantian view and thinking about what your responsibility should be and what types of things you should never do, at first I might say actually forcing her to drink the wine was the worst part because that's a huge violation of a person's consent that she did herself, not just stepping back and letting other people do immoral things. So, um, that's a really, but she doesn't know for sure
mm,
what it even is. It could have been poison that would have assassinated her. Like, I don't know that she knows exactly what's going on. We don't
right,
see enough of her thoughts. She reacts pretty quickly here.
yeah,
So, um, I think that that's pretty messed up in the first place. That was my first instinct. But then I realized she actually found out more about how disgusting this situation was after she drugged the woman and then she left, which would make
right,
that seem pretty reprehensible as well. But I also would think that at that point, she does have to weigh that against her self interest. It would be extremely dangerous for her to reveal herself as an Aes Sedai, and how else is she going to save this woman e- except by using the power as a small
right,
woman by herself? What can she do? So
exactly,
I think that can be argued from either direction pretty
yes,
convincingly. Because if we're looking at the utilitarian perspective, that's more of, you would say that walking away is the worst part if you're looking at it. And I would see that if we're looking at the impact on that woman,
hmm
then that's still pretty bad.
yes,
But I'm seeing throughout this chapter, she has this very reactionary, like retributive perspective on when people are doing something wrong. She
right,
wants to get back at them
right,
instead of like preventing the violence herself. She's like, I wish I could beat the heck out of this woman, but then
right,
people would know I'm Aes Sedai.
right.
Like that's what she wished about the first horse thief.
Yes, yes, and I can kind of see. Okay, we're putting basically the mission ahead of myself,
hmm
and
Yeah.
there's certainly a cause for that and a reason for that. But I think she is using that to justify some wrong decisions. First of all, had she been more experienced, less green, less naive, she could have avoided these situations entirely.
Mhm.
But that's not something they did.
Yeah.
You can always look back and say, "I wish I had done something different." But in my mind, she stepped off the path even by entering that part of Chachin, not turning around and leaving, not finding another way to contact Siwan,
Mhm.
by not using the power to stop some of these things. And again, in my mind, I guess because I can be sometimes a very naive person,
Same.
and yeah, and I could see if I got in a suspicious situation, if I had the power to compel someone to drink the spice wine just to prove that it was safe or unsafe,
Mhm.
and think, well, that shows that'll teach you. But then realizing the situation got worse, yeah, I could see that survival instinct kicking in. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
But I would have loved to have seen self doubt over that later.
Yes,
Later on in the
totally.
chapter or the next chapter, dwelling on that. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that.
Mhm.
I wish I had done something different. And of course, you don't get entirely in someone's mind in this. You don't know if they had this self, uh, Lord, I can't even say it, self-incriminating ideas
Mhm.
later, or going over things in their mind when they laid there trying to go to sleep that night, and perhaps that was there and just wasn't shown to us. But to me, that would have, I mean, that all makes her seem a little more human and a little
Yeah.
more inexperienced in what she's doing here.
Mhm.
But at the same time, yeah, I can imagine someone not sleeping that night because of
Yeah.
what they had just seen and witnessed, and be dwelling on the thoughts of the poverty and the lawlessness, and what a leader's responsibility should be to these people, and what my response should have been to this situation. But we're not given that, and without being given that, yeah, we just have to conclude she really messed up. She went
Yeah.
against what she knew to be right and wrong here.
Mhm.
And I love Moraine, and it doesn't lessen her. In fact, it makes her seem a lot more real to me,
Oh, yeah.
because we all do things that we regret later. We all do things we wish we could take back. We all look back and say, man, I should have changed direction 10 steps before that. But at least on step 8, I should have done something different. And we don't. So we mess things up, and then we just want to back out of it and pretend like it never happened. Because we all have
Yeah.
things we're ashamed of. We all have those moral failings. And I would like to have seen that kind of introspection from her later.
I would
But
too. I think she is so laser focused on the overall goal of uh really the saving the world that
yes,
we do see that that's what keeps her up at night. Worrying about being put on the sun throne and thinking about the dragon reborn is the stuff we are given about what
right,
she worries about the most. And I think she's able to make some quick decisions and for the most part put some collateral damage, so to speak, out of her mind in service of the larger goal. And that seems consistent with the Moiraine we meet later in the series that our Emmons Fielders are really suspicious of, because she is willing to leave a wake of collateral damage by leading these folks out of Emmons Field and trying to find and guide the Dragon Reborn. So, we see her destroy um, she destroys a ferry. She fails to stop an inn from burning down. Somebody really could have gotten hurt, but they had
right,
to leave Barrelon. They could have gotten caught by a fade, and that would have been a lot worse.
yes,
So she definitely is able to keep the greater good in mind, which is her strength and in some cases her weakness.
yes, I agree.
So, yeah, sorry that that was such a long rant, but there was just so much to say about what this means for her character, I think.
Yeah. If we're doing a character point of view, we needed to go in depth into that one, because that was a big moment. And it was
Yeah.
not a big moment for me first time reading through the story.
Mhm.
This time focusing on one character and seeing this character grow and how her personality builds and changes and grows. Yeah, that became a big moment to me in the story.
Yeah. Same. The first time I read through, I was definitely unsettled. Like it did make me kind of queasy. And I was like, oh, that's weird. But then the story moves on and I didn't really dwell on it. But today I really
Right.
did.
Yes.
That's about all I have for chapter 23. Really, that's almost all of the notes I wrote about it was just about what are the ethics of this decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of our listeners, when they're faced with ethical situations, will stop and think, what is the right thing to do, not just for me, but for society. What's the right thing in this situation? Hopefully, we'll make good decisions to keep us out of those places. But if you're there, I hope myself, you, and everyone listening, we can stop and think about that. What's the right thing to do here? Ah, so now that I've tried to steal your thunder on that,
You're fine.
uh,
I can always edit
well,
it to make you sound less important. I can.
right, you throw me in the after show. That's quite
Right.
all right. Chapter 24, making use of invisibility. I anticipated this chapter a lot as it was, read to the podcast and studied through and made notes. Um, because for some reason, though I have read the story before, this took me back to Moraine's secret weave that we were told about, yet we didn't see or she didn't reveal what it was. And so when I saw the title of this chapter, I'm like, oh, is it invisibility? Is that what she has? Well, let's look at the chapter and see. Chapter 24 begins with Moiraine and Siouan as they discuss their plans to enter the palace while they're getting dressed the next morning. We're not revealed what the plan is, but they're just discussing the good and bad parts of it. So they go downstairs for breakfast. They hire a sedan chair and four bearers to take them to the bank, where Moraine's apparent Carheen nobility, the way she's dressed, in other words, earned them an interview with the banker herself. After retrieving 10 pouches of gold, which was from one of the smaller promissory notes she carried, they take them back to the inn and leave them in storeroom there. Moiraine and Siouan went to the dressmaker's inn, one that was recommended by the owner of the inn. The dressmaker, Saline Dorleman, uh, measured them. They were going through all the steps they normally did that we had seen before in Tarvalon as they were going to the dressmaker. But here, Moiraine handles things differently. She intentionally pushes the dressmaker toward a state of anger by making demands and going against protocol. And then Moiraine offers to pay her 30 pieces of gold, which is far too much for the dresses, if she can have them done extremely quickly, with the promise of 30 more, but -6 for each day that they're late. So they got their dresses made very quickly. And 2 days later, we see Lady Moiraine Damodred was received at the palace with all the honors due to a visiting noble. While her maid, Suki, yes, you heard air quotes around Suki, was completely ignored. Moiraine knew that she was a ripe target for any assassins, or especially for Master Gorthanes, who would probably hear that she was there and make a beeline for the palace if at all possible. While the virtually invisible Suki, who's Siouan, moved into the servants' social circles, learning that the next woman on their list, Lady Inez, was a recent widow who would be in seclusion for at least 2 more weeks in her mourning. But Siouan had planned to meet a young footman named Cal. And this ends chapter 24, making use of invisibility. So we see here that even though I had that anticipation of Moraine's secret weave because I had completely forgotten what it was, what we see here is not literal invisibility, but figurative. No one pays attention to the maid. No one pays attention to the woman, the lady in waiting, the servants there. And so she's able to go around and gossip with the other servants and kind of make use of Moraine's position, who, of course, is in a dangerous position here. She's placed herself somewhere where she could be the focus of assassins or anyone who's out to get her. And as well, it puts her name out there for any sister who may be in the town to kind of perk up and say, "What? Did I hear that correctly? Is Moiraine Damodred at the palace?" And so they would be able to focus in on her, whether it is one of the sisters with good intentions who knows that Moiraine fled Tarvalon, or one of the Black Aja with bad intentions. They've set her up as a target.
I was trying to think, and Maureen's point against Siwan arguing this is way too dangerous the whole time was, well, think of a better way then, and I can't.
Right, right.
The biggest thing I noticed about this chapter really was not so much the plot points as it was the The bickering between Moiraine and Siwan.
Right, right, and especially when they're caught by one of the servants there in the palace,
Mhm.
when, Siwan's up with her finger in Moraine's face, or I guess reaching down with her
Mhm.
finger into Moraine's face when the servant walks in. Well, that's not the scene you normally see. So you wonder what kind of gossip that engenders later.
Right?
But yeah, it is a little odd because I kept wanting there to be some other way for them to get in, but really this is, in a sense, the best way. But if it was okay for her to basically blow her cover to get into the palace, why was it not okay for her to blow her cover earlier in the city in the previous chapter when she was in the seedier, rougher parts of town?
Right?
I don't know. It's hard to answer that, but
Mm.
this is what they chose. It puts them, I guess you would say, out of immediate physical danger from just random violence in the rougher parts of town to the more laser-like focus of political attention, which Moraine grew up with.
Mhm.
And I got to wondering about that too. And I didn't bring it up when we were reviewing chapter 23, though it did kind of cross my mind then. Um, perhaps one reason Moraine could walk into the rougher parts of the town and seem so oblivious what was going on around her is that she grew up in the crosshairs basically, knowing that because of her familial ties with the Sun Throne, she could be a target for assassination. She could be a target for kidnapping or blackmail, anything like that,
Mm.
uh, just because of the political machinations of Carheen.
Mhm.
So maybe she kind of grew up with that. I'm in danger all the time anyway, so why worry about it?
Yeah,
I
that's a
don't know.
good point.
Now, I'm not saying the excuses, the mistakes that were made.
Mhm.
I'm just saying maybe that's one reason she just was not so offended by the things she experienced there that she left that part of town very quickly. In fact, she stayed there all day because she kind of grew up. Her life's always in danger, so maybe she takes it kind of blithely. I don't know,
Yeah.
just a thought.
No, that makes sense. She does come off as a little kind of dissociated, like aloof, and doesn't get very close to people except for Suwan. And so because of that, she also seems to have this sense of being aloof from danger.
Yes,
So that's part of how, I mean, when people try to protect themselves from being hurt emotionally or whatever by not caring about danger or not caring about something negative, they also cut themselves off from feeling positive emotions and
right.
experiencing joys in life as well. And so I
Yeah.
think she has probably really built up some walls around herself. She lost
Mm,
her mother at a young age. That would make her probably prone to wanting to build up a lot of kind of defenses. And that defense for some people is dissociating, not being
oh,
very involved in what's going on, just kind of uh, being aloof, I guess. I know I've used that word
sure.
a lot already, but
No, but that's fine. I had
I
never
get that
considered
vibe.
that. Yeah, I never considered that until you said it, but it makes total sense. It kind of fits in the picture of not only the way she was raised in Carheen, and the game of houses and all the Desdemar that goes on, but as
Hmm.
well the entire atmosphere of the White Tower. If someone is prone to dissociating themselves, that would only encourage that more. That would only make them more
Oh,
withdrawn
yeah.
because that is an atmosphere that you, is not necessarily healthy emotionally on people.
Yeah. And we see Lan with the same pattern. And we see that pattern of behavior become especially destructive in Rand later in the series. But the reason it's so relevant with Lan right now is that he cuts himself off from feeling things too, because he has this, one man war with the Blight.
Right.
And he kind of believes that that's his purpose. So he's going to cut himself off not only from really caring about danger to his person, but also to becoming intimate with people and allowing himself to be close to people. And that's part of why those two clash so hard and they're so stubborn I think because of those walls and defenses built up. So this is a
Yes. Yes.
common pattern you see in like romantic relationships where people, when you are when you have these walls built up to try to protect yourself from feeling things, you're going to be especially defensive and interpret other people's behaviors as being against you, maybe when they're not always.
Yes.
And so you
Very.
tend to dig in your heels and make it worse. And over time, for a lot of people, that destroys relationships by leading to things like resentment and contempt. But here, there's just these early stages of a lot of defensiveness. And I think that necessarily has to get broken down between these two characters because of the warder bond. You can't
Right,
have walls with that person anymore.
right,
And
right.
so it's a lot harder to be defensive because they're already through all the walls.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, very true, very true. I mean, I kind of had a sense of that, but man, you just took it so deep there. Really, you see that relationship so clearly the way you described it. One of the things that I thought was kind of nice and touching, and I'll close out my part of the podcast with this,
Mhm,
is that, of course, we skipped over 22, chapter 22, because that was told from Land's point of view. But
mhm.
two or three times in the chapter, he catches himself thinking about Lady Alice, uh,
Yeah.
and thinking about Moiraine. And of course, he's a little upset about the fleas and the black flies, and because evidently her tricks continued throughout the rest of the journey, and he's wondering how she did that. But he keeps coming back to her in his mind, just in small things, and so annoyed by her. He's so glad to be rid of her, yet she's still on his mind, which is it's pretty obvious where that's leading in the story. But I
Mhm,
thought it was nice. And then you don't really find Moraine thinking about land that much, just a little
mhm.
bit. But at one point, someone had mentioned something about, I think it was the dressmaker. I've got to make all these dresses for all these ladies because the king of Malkir is coming to visit the palace. And she's like, in her mind, I mean, it's so stupid. Malkir's been gone for 25 years. There is no king of Malkir. And we see that almost comic tension rising in the story just between those thoughts of those two, the way they think of each other in those private moments.
Mhm.
Again, it's kind of comedic value, but I see it building. It's interesting that in the midst of something so hard hitting, that can be so gritty at times, there's still just a hint of rom com there
Yeah, there kind of is.
to lighten it up, and I like it. Even though again their relationship never, as far as I know, becomes romantic in any way.
Mhm.
It still has some of those same elements, I guess I should say.
Yeah, just because it's so intimate, and like we've said before, you don't always see, platonic relationships being that close and intimate for
Right,
people to be
right,
that vulnerable with each other. And
right.
that was part of the point I was making earlier, is that in order to experience a lot of the joys in life, you also have to leave yourself open and vulnerable to being hurt. And that's just,
Absolutely.
part of the ups and downs of the rich tapestry of human emotional life. And so
Yeah.
I think that she and Lan are able to get there. And it's
Right,
also beautiful how she's able to get there with Suwan. They have such a deep bond where they're both pretty defensive people, I think.
right,
Maybe Suwan a little bit less so around men. She's already like getting kind of flirty and excited
right. Yeah,
about her role and kind of getting into it. But I think that they have such an intimacy where they don't have as much of this defensiveness with each other. Now they certainly do annoy each other and they certainly fight,
yeah,
but
yeah.
they are just so close. And Suwan really cares for her. That's why Suwan's being so angry and pushy about how dangerous this situation is.
Right, right. Even the little things like when they were going out to breakfast in the morning, and Moraine's like, "We just grab a few rolls, something we can eat while we travel." And in her mind says, "This is what you have to do. You have to kind of sweep Siwan along, or else you'll find yourself swept along by her." I
Mm-hmm.
think, wow, I bet Siwan would have the same thoughts. In
Yep.
other words, my best friend here is so pig-headed. You either get control early, or else you lose control completely. And there's nothing, this, or I should say, very little in between. One of the other is going to be in control of the situation.
Yep.
And I thought that was just funny too, kind of illustrative of their close friendship. But at the same time, they recognize she's so pig-headed. Didn't realize you're pointing your finger at her. You have three more pointing back at you.
She sure does. And I think her defensive shell, and the way she reacts to Lan is part of what landed her in this dangerous situation of all of chapter 23. Because at the very beginning, she's like, "Oh, Lan told me not to go to the rough parts of town, huh?
Right,
So that's
right.
exactly where I'm going to spend the entire day."
Exactly. Yeah. You cannot push her anywhere.
Mm-mm.
Very, very stubborn. And in fact, any
No.
any attempt becomes a challenge. Yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely
but
see that in her personality.
His words at that time, I mean, he does know how to push her buttons, and has certainly already started to do that. But with those comments and him moving away from her quickly, it had nothing to do with her. Um,
Right. Right.
that was just a normal word of caution you would say to anybody, like, "Hey, keep away from the rough parts of this place. It's kind of a
Yeah.
seedy town." But
Right.
she immediately had to interpret that as an attack against her.
Ah, gosh, I had not looked at it. That's why I love talking to you about these things because you see so much in depth into people. That's just fascinating to me. You open up entire vistas of their personalities that I missed even studying it in depth. But you're right. Yeah, she saw that as a challenge, and even though the author does not bring that out, you definitely see it in the story.
Yeah. Well, it's my the fact that I sort of consult with yellow sisters so often to really
Ah,
understand the logic of how people operate. Um
yes,
and the grays, with their mediation skills, they also have a lot to say about how to hear another person's perspective, so they're kind of intuitive about people as well.
right.
So I got a shout out to my fellow Ajas that really help elevate my philosophy to being more than just like arguing about math with other members of my Aja. Yeah, that's about all I have for these chapters. Join us next time for episode 10, covering chapters 25 and 26 and the epilogue. So we're about to finish New Spring. You can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also stay updated on Twitter at Lajara or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tell them bye, Giskell.
Bye, Giskell.
While when you think I'm going to be talking for a while, you can just mute yourself so there won't
Oh,
be
yeah. Ah,
interference.
yeah. See, I don't think of that often. I should.
Well, that's what
Um,
I tried to do last time when I walked out and got snacks and started eating walnuts when you were like,
yeah.
Lajara, are you still with us?
Oh, I didn't know that. You didn't tell me that
So
later. But
that's
okay.
what I had meant to do, was to
Yeah.
mute it, but I think I actually unmuted it. All right, I have a quick correction from a previous episode.
Oh,
Um,
what did I do?
I think it was both of us, really. I think it was a
Okay.
point you brought up, but I just kept running with it and affirming it. So, in episode 7, our Halloween one, when we talked about scary stuff,
Yes.
we talked about Damane and the Adom being so scary, and how it overrides the 3 oaths. But it turns
Hmm.
out that that's not accurate. So I'd forgotten there is textual evidence for this one, and RJ addressed it in an interview.
Oh.
So I said I taken as Damane are not useful for some tasks like using the power, except in self defense, using the power as a
Ah.
weapon. So they could use them like they use Egwene to find ore because of her sense for metal. They could probably use them for other industrial type tasks, but they wouldn't be as good in battle, especially if they were having them fight against fellow sisters. So
Ah.
I did
So
not
the.
catch this though.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to give a big thanks to Twitter follower Kimberly, or at Kimmy Don, for pointing that out.
Okay. And I hate that I missed that because once you've said it, it kind of brought back to mind there were some of the sisters. I was thinking just one or two that they said was basically worthless as Domine. But
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it was because they were sisters, because of the oaths and even the breaking down of the personality from the severe and harsh training that dominates go through. It's not enough to override the power of the oath rod. I totally missed that. Totally blew it. At least we are adult enough to admit it when we make mistakes.
Right?
So I want to thank all of our listeners for throwing that out there. Thank Kim especially for doing that.
Yeah, I love that we're getting any engagement.
Mhm.
At the time that I took the notes this morning, so that's November 3rd, 2019 is the day of recording. We've had 79 unique downloads of
Ooh.
any episodes of the podcast. So that's all episodes combined, with 16 downloads of the first episode, all on Podbean. I don't know any statistics from any of the other platforms, but I went into this expecting that we would be kind of broadcasting this out into the void, and to just still enjoy talking with each other, even if nobody ever listens to it. So even for a single person to indicate that they've listened is extremely rewarding to me. So I just, again, wanted to thank the listeners. And um, Tim from one of my go-to Wheel of Time podcasts that I listen to, the Watt Pod Through, actually gave us a shout out and was saying that he's looking forward to new episodes, and that means a lot.
Yes. Yes. Well, see, I went into this with the expectation that the world would be at our feet within months,
Oh
because we
yeah.
are so, obviously so good at this. But at the same time, I'm thankful for each and every listener, anyone who takes the time to listen to this, because this is such a niche podcast. Not only are the Wheel of Time fans such a niche group within people who love to read, but studying it from this point of view is very niche within the Wheel of Time group. So we are very much narrowing down our field of focus here. There are a
Hmm.
lot of people to whom this will not appeal. We know that. So we are thankful for each and every one of you. It's awesome.